My name is Kevin Dawson, President and CEO of ISA Cybersecurity. We're going to be discussing one of the most important roles in your cyber incident management, the breach coach. We'll explore what a breach coach actually does, how they can mitigate legal risk, affect your incident reporting procedures, and how a coach fits into your overall incident response team. To help us discuss these key issues, we are delighted to welcome Imran Ahmad from Norton Rose Fulbright, where he is a partner and head of technology and co-chair data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity. Imran is an author, a practicing lawyer, and an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Law. But it's in his role as one of Canada's most respected cyber incident breach coaches that we are speaking to him today. Welcome, Imran.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
You want to start off by telling the team a bit about your practice and what you do?
So I wear two hats at the firm. One is I head up our national technology law practice. And funny story, before I got into breach coaching, I actually trained as a tech lawyer on the commercial side of things. So that's where I got my experience initially related to technology that morphed later on into privacy and then more recently into cybersecurity. But the other hat that you mentioned as well is that I co-chair our cyber and privacy group with one of my very good partners, John Castle, who's based in Calgary. And in that role, we do two things. One is we that's what we call breach coach. Client's been hacked. It's incident response time kind of support that we provide. And then obviously, you want to be as prepared as you can be before an incident. So we're working with clients on the pre-breach side of things as well. So that can relate to, for example, tabletop exercises and other items that are on everybody's minds as well.
That's great. Yeah, so having said, tell me a bit about your role as a breach coach for an organization. What does that look like? What are the things you're doing? When do you get engaged?
If I had to really bring it down to three main areas, and there's a lot of other things that go into the role of the breach coach, but three main ones is number one, first and foremost, I think the reason a lawyer is typically involved, and typically an external lawyer, is the element of privilege. When you're dealing with an incident, you typically don't have great visibility what's going on. You have partial information, often contradictory information coming in. And so you want to make sure that the investigation is set up in a way where the client is sharing information with their lawyer, which would be the breach coach, who can then provide legal advice as to what to do next. And that can extend also to third-party experts that are being brought into the investigation as well. So although I'm a lawyer and I do breaches, I'm not a forensic investigator. I'm not a crisis communications expert. I have a variety of expertise, but definitely not in those areas, for example. And I may need to bring experts to help me understand the situation, resolve the issue, and then give advice, obviously, to the client. So sometimes privilege can also extend to third-party vendors. Role number one of the breach coach, sort of acting as a quarterback, is to make sure, where appropriate, not in all instances, legal privilege is asserted on the investigation and any third parties that we may be getting involved. The second piece, probably more natural for a lawyer, is on the legal side of things. There are laws in Canada, provincially, federally, in some limited cases, also in terms of industries or specific areas of practice where there's unique directives or guidelines or laws and regulations that you need to be mindful of. Navigating that through Canada and globally can be super complex. And our job is really to accompany the client and make sure they can navigate through those. You could also have, for example, contracts. So you may not have statutory obligations, but you may also have contractual ones with your clients where you have agreed to terms or need to comply with it in a way where in a live breach, you need to notify them and share information. And then the third piece that goes into that bucket of legal is law enforcement. And I'm sure we'll get into this as well, but the role of law enforcement has become more pronounced. They are allies in some respects, but their mandate is different, and prioritizing and sharing information is something that can be a bit complex to navigate through our legal system and certainly law enforcement system. The third one, and probably the third main bucket, and happy to expand on any of these if you like, is the communication piece. Certainly, as I mentioned, we're not comms experts, but we want to see anything that goes out to staff, goes out to business partners, goes out to regulators or the public more broadly speaking. We like to see it because you don't want to overstate or understate an incident. You want to be accurate. You don't want to speculate. There's certain things you want to do because once you make a statement and it's public, it's very hard to correct or walk it back in case it was inaccurate or incorrect. So really, those are the three main buckets: legal privilege, supporting on legal issues, and communication, with a variety of others that can kick in, but those are the three main ones.
So let's talk about one of them there, or actually it might even cover a bunch of them, is I get asked a lot of questions from clients because we get involved on the technical side that you referred to before. Oftentimes they're asking us legal questions, and we say that's not for us to comment on Do you have a breach coach? Do you not? Tell me a bit about kind of the difference between what you do and especially that you have and call it in-house counsel. What do you bring to the table that, and why should an organization look to external breach coaches versus their in-house counsel?
It's a good question. It comes up pretty frequently. Client has in-house counsel or has an existing counsel they work with externally as well. Why do I need a so-called specialized breach counsel at any of the firms that they may be talking to? Two reasons, primarily. One, cybersecurity is still a relatively new area. It's been around for a long time, and I know you're knee deep into it and have been for decades. But in the legal space, in terms of practitioners in Canada who do a ton of volume, the numbers are still limited, but luckily growing. And so as a result of it, getting really good expertise with practical advice is hard to come by in some instances. But the more fundamental question about why in-house versus external or external versus in-house is when we talk about legal privilege, it is really the protection of any legal advice that's being provided to the client. So for example, if you're my client and I'm your lawyer, and you share factual information with me, that itself is not privileged. But if I'm giving you advice to go ahead and notify today versus tomorrow, or other types of strategic advice from a legal perspective, that advice itself is protected. Now, the challenge for in-house counsel is they're technically an employee of the company, and they may be wearing two hats on a day-to-day basis. Certainly, they have a legal role, perhaps, but they may also be giving business advice, risk analysis. And risk analysis advice or business advice is not covered by legal privilege, despite the fact it may be coming from a lawyer in-house. So to take away any potential ambiguity that in-house counsel may have been giving advice either under the business hat or the legal hat, we typically retain external counsel to take that ambiguity away, and they're the ones giving the advice. Typically, when you hire an external law firm that has expertise in cybersecurity, arguably they're only giving you legal advice, not business advice per se.
Yeah, I think of it in the terms of like my golf swing and muscle memory. I mean, the cybersecurity piece is what we do every day. Companies have their own cybersecurity teams, but they're not dealing with incidents every day like we are. Companies have their own internal counsel, but they're not dealing with breaches every day. So you're hiring an expert to do an expert task, and it's that muscle memory of the things that you do over and over again and know exactly what. So it completely makes sense to me. I've had a lot of customers ask that question. So let's jump back for a second into kind of the breach coach role. I'd like to get your perspective because I get customers asking me, and sometimes it's in the occasion where they think something's happened or they're not sure, that maybe they haven't engaged their own counsel or a cyber insurance policy or anything, or maybe we're just talking about a tabletop exercise. They ask, what does the ideal scenario, and I know it can't be ideal because they're dealing with a threat actor of some sort, but play out how the best breach responses look from your standpoint in terms of the cooperation amongst the various people that you talked about, bringing in those experts, the cooperation amongst the organization. Often the CISO or that person in role is completely under the spotlight. What does the ideal situation kind of look like?
In an ideal scenario, we would have talked to the client ahead of time. So they have not had a breach. They're thinking about cyber because it's a risk to their business. Their board or their leadership team may have it on the top of their mind. And they're going to be basically the point that you made earlier, Kevin, about muscle memory. They're actually putting all the things in place and then testing it ahead of time.
So they have an IRP, they have done a tabletop, they're testing some of their playbooks, those sorts of things. So
exactly. And they've also drilled down to the specifics, right? I mean, it's high level, everybody knows what to do. But when you get into the actual logistics, it's more complex. I'll give you an example. One area we spend a ton of time, even though it's not directly related to what the breach coach does, but it relates to the whole trigger mechanism. Okay. So if you're in a business or any building, so look at your office right now. If you go down the corridor headed towards the elevator, there's a little alarm switch that you can pull in the event something happens, or a break glass kind of, compartment that you can access. You need to know when to break it. Is it when the smoke comes out? Is it when somebody screams something's going on? Is it when you get an email or multiple emails? So understanding where the escalation process is, how do you triage that and then make sure now it's go time, now it's break glass, and call the breach coach because that's how things start, or break glass now and call our internal CISO who's going to then trigger the process. You would be surprised how many clients have the best plan possible, but the escalation piece, you can lose 3, 4, 5, in some cases 6 hours, especially where that piece has been outsourced to a third party who's doing monitoring for them. The alerts may be going to the wrong person. The alerts may be triaged as a priority 1, 2, or 3 incorrectly. and a variety of other things. So getting the details down very, very clearly and testing those pieces are really, really critical.
You bring up a really key point, because it's something that we advocate with all of our clients. We manage a bunch of clients' cyber infrastructure in the role that we do, and we always we try to promote that we be part of their tabletop and IRP planning, because effectively we're the ones watching the cameras and watching the alerts and watching those things. So you bring up a very important point there, is in terms of that pre work and making sure that everyone who needs to be involved is involved, and when the time comes, we're pulling that fire alarm appropriately.
Right, exactly. And what you want to do, again, going back to your question about what would be an ideal scenario or the best case scenario given the circumstances, you've done all that pre-breach work, including finding who your key vendors are going to be. And that often is not something a client will think about necessarily. They'll think of the most obvious ones. Oh, I need to have a forensic firm basically to do the investigation, contain, and restore. Maybe I need a breach coach, and they leave it at that. What they haven't contemplated are other vendors they may need, like a ransom negotiator, or if they need a crisis communication firm, or if they need boots on the ground because they've got multiple locations and they need to actually physically go computer to computer and do the thing that they have to do to restore their operations, or a variety of other vendors that they may need to pull into the mix. And having them on the ready, have the confidence level that they can do the work, they understand your business, and more importantly, Kevin, having the agreements in place ahead of time. I mean, we lose, you'll talk about the worst case in just a minute, but we lose a ton of time when we're brought in fresh and new vendors are being introduced to the client, and they're looking at the agreement. They go, well, these terms seem a bit off. They're not the normal commercial terms you would see for a regular commercial relationship. And the short answer is, well, hear you loud and clear. First of all, there's some unique aspects to cyber where we need to be mindful that the terms will always be different. But secondly, you don't have a ton of time to negotiate these. Each time you do a turn of the agreement, the other party won't accept it in 5 seconds. They will have their legal counsel review it. Then that takes more time, and your response arguably may be slowed down as a result of it.
Yeah, it's the whole notion. I mean, and it's been common for years that people have retainers with their lawyers to get everything out of the way, so that when they need to make that call, they're there. And it's the same thing in cyber. We have IR retainers with our firms so that we understand their environment beforehand, as you said before, and that when the issue does occur, we can jump right in and all that stuff's worked out. So that's a great point. That does help make the ideal scenario versus the cold call it, or the frantic call. The other thing that I think, and I don't know if you've had this experience, is, these are always stressful, emotional moments for the customer, for the client, for the party. Yourself, ourselves, we can kind of separate ourselves from the emotion, but my business partner and mentor 20 years ago once told me, and I keep it in the back of my mind all the time, emotion trumps logic all the time. And so we find ourselves with customers making emotional decisions in the heat of the moment without making logical and thought through decisions. Again, talking to the pre-planning and the preamble that needs to go on before in every organization before something happens.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
That's a great point that you raised, Kevin. I mean, it's odd, and this may sound a bit funny when I say it this way, but when you think of a coach, right? We're talking about a breach coach, for example, and what they do. Why are we using the term coach? The coach isn't technically a player. The coach is there to manage the players, make sure we've got a game plan, make sure we allocate the right resources, but also help support. There's times where I've been on calls with clients and it is quite emotional. A CEO going to his or her board and saying pay or not pay, and recognizing these are criminals and being extorted. There's emotions involved in that. How do you sort of cut the noise out and make sure this is what we focus for the either interest of the business or the employees or the consumers that they're servicing or others? Those are the kind of things that hopefully a breach coach coming from the outside and with some level of experience can give perspective on at least.
Yeah, I'm going to joke for a second. I think back to my Star Trek days. I'm a big Trekkie, and the Vulcans would be perfect at this because it's all about the logic. The good of the many outweigh the good of the few. So switching gears a bit again for a second, we've seen changes in the last several years around the tactics that threat actors take, their approaches, what they're doing. It started with just ransom, and then ransom and extortion after the ransom, and different tactics, and now going after third-party suppliers and those sorts of things. I joke every time everyone asks, I say we're a 32-year-old startup because our business is changing every day. We've had to change the ways that we protect customers, that we remediate, that we report, that we do something. How in the kind of evolution of cyber criminals and cyber activity has the breach coach's role changed? Like, how has your world changed from 5 years ago to today?
Candidly, it's changed quite a bit. It's significantly more involved. So let me give you an example of topic du jour any given day is ransomware, right? And the example I give our clients is think of a filing cabinet, which has a little button on the top to lock it up, right? Historically, maybe not 5 years ago, but close to 5 years ago, if you had your filing cabinet locked up, but you had a key, which is akin to your backups, you could restore. That was it.
Right.
Honestly, very few people needed a breach counsel in those situations. And I'm not actually sure what a breach counsel would have done if there was only data being locked up. And clients got smart. They tried to get focus on backups and get those backups restored as quickly as possible. But the unique aspect of cyber is this. Contrary to disaster recovery and business continuity plans, which are based on very static risks that are out there, cyber is dynamic. So when hackers realize, just taking back to the filing cabinet analogy, look, they've got a key, we're done. Like, we spent all this time, but we're not getting any hits. And it's a volume game for them. How can we do that? So, well, maybe before I lock up the filing cabinet, I can steal a few files or make copies of a few files and then lock it up. And if they have a backup, so be it, but maybe they'll pay for the data. And that was their golden ticket in many ways. You saw starting in 2020 with the group Maze in particular, which really made it mainstream, data theft coupled with the actual encryption, dual extortion,
Right.
was becoming the norm. And what have we talked about? So there's a playbook for that as well. When you're dual extorted, when data is taken and files are encrypted, there's two ways of doing it. You restore from backups if you have them, and you try to buy as much time because that you pay or don't pay for the data to be deleted or returned, you still need to notify potentially clients in that situation. And so they realized that the playbook was to drag or rag the puck a little bit, drag out the negotiations to get comms ready, and then ghost potentially the threat actor and be ready for the fallout of any kind of data dump. So they changed their tactic again. And where we're seeing now is they're either putting additional pressure, contacting clients, giving them shorter timeframes to respond, or completely altogether bypassing and not encrypting data and just stealing the data. So imagine if I send you an email, Kevin, and you're the victim and I'm the hacker, and I say, look, I have access to your environment. I won't tell you which door I came through, but I will show you all the data I've taken from you, or at least a sample of it. If you don't pay me, I will attack you in 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever the time frame is. My point in all of this is the tactics change. And I'm not trying to be self-serving here by any stretch, but the role of the breach coach is not an automation. Like, this is not a science, it's a bit of an art where we have to look at the threat actor, see their tactics, and then get involved. That piece, the changing threat landscape, coupled with the extensive legal requirements that are now kicking in with these new tactics that they're employing, has forced us to be much more involved. So we're there certainly with law enforcement, we're there on the ransom negotiation, we're there on the legal notification piece, we're talking to regulators on a regular basis, the communication that goes out externally. We're spending a ton of time with the boards, explaining to them why potentially the client will be making a payment and why that's our recommendation to pay or not to pay in some certain scenarios. Sanction checks, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some level potentially. If a ransom is being made, you have to do a sanction check. How do you even evaluate a sanction check? Third parties issue certificates, go, no goes. But on top of it, clients want the lawyers to look at it and give a written opinion or a written view that it's okay to make the payment based on what they've seen, from a legal perspective at least. Significantly more involved than even 5 or 6 years ago.
So let's take that or sanction check and go a little deeper on that, because ISA as a company have chosen specifically not to participate in the paying of ransom. We leave that to other third parties. You can engage them, we can engage them. We've done it together on certain situations, but obviously you do. Talk a bit about what that looks like and where it's applicable, or when it's applicable, I guess.
We typically always discourage payment when you can avoid making a payment of a ransom. These are
Yeah,
more
we
often
do
than
too.
not criminal groups, and we don't want to see a payment. So typically, what we do is on the first side, certainly going to check the viability of backups. But let's say they're not viable. But in parallel, we have arguably engaged with a threat actor, not necessarily to make a payment, but to get intelligence, understand what the demand is, which threat actor group we're dealing with some level of certainty, understanding what documents or files and folders or data they may have potentially taken, what the scope of the data theft may have looked like, and so on and so forth. The payment part is a different beast altogether. Do you pay or not pay? There's a cost issue. So what is the demand versus where we may end up? How much time do we need? Are we paying just for the decryptor or for decryptor plus data theft return? Or just, we don't need the decryptor, but we want the data suppressed and no mention of our company name. What will the impact be in terms of notifying third-party clients and so on? So there's a whole discussion that occurs with the client on that front throughout the process. I think what you're asking also is who retains whom. Lawyers don't get in front of back of keyboards and screens and say, okay, I'm going to talk to the hacker. These are expert companies that specialize in ransom communication or negotiation. They're the ones who are going to engage with the threat actor, share some intelligence. What's the track record of this threat actor? How long have they been around? What kind of discount can you expect? Are they
Can you trust that they're going to do what they're going to do when you pay them? That comes up all the time with our customers. How do I know that they're going to give me back my data and unencrypt my data that they've given me? And there used to be a theory that there was honor amongst thieves, but I haven't seen that play out.
Right. And, there's pros and cons of dealing with a particular group versus another. But the ransom negotiator, because they do so many of these, regrettably, in terms of impact on organizations, have the intelligence, have the data that they can share with you in real time to make those decisions. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
Assuming a decision is made by the client or the victim organization to make a payment, the ransom negotiator is also going to do what we call the sanction check. So what is a sanction check? In Canada, there's Department of Foreign Affairs, there's FinTrack. In the US, you have Office of Foreign Asset Control, and a variety of others around the world, where there are databases that have been set up for certain individuals or groups. You cannot make a payment because they're a sanctioned entity, meaning it's a no-go. You cannot make any kind of payment, let alone a cryptocurrency payment. And in those kind of situations, more often than not, they will provide us a certificate. So we've reviewed, these are the indicators of compromise. We've looked at, we've identified the group, looking at it versus all of these databases for sanction checks. It came back clear, or no, it did not come back clear. If it comes back clear, then the ransom negotiator is going to procure the cryptocurrencies on various exchanges, and then obviously do the settlement of the payment with the threat actor, hopefully obtain the decryptor and some confirmation that data has been deleted.
I wanted to touch on two things around your involvement. A lot of our customers have cyber insurance, and they believe that through that cyber insurance, should something happen, they're going to put a call in and a breach coach will be assigned, and all the other parties that might be involved or required will be assigned. For those customers that have policies, what is your recommendation to them in terms of, can they come and seek out a breach coach in advance to have some of these conversations? Should they? And what does that look like as it relates to the relationship with their cyber insurer?
Absolutely. I think it's super helpful for the following single most important reason in my mind. You're going to be at some point facing a cybersecurity incident of magnitude as an organization. You're going to be in the foxhole with a group of folks, vendors and support that you're going to be requiring. And the breach coach, whoever he or she is going to be going to be really critical. So you need to have that trust relationship and that comfort level that this is somebody who knows what they're talking about, which is a given, but more importantly, somebody I can actually trust to give me clear advice how I want it. Some folks have a different style. Like my style is quite direct. I can give options, but I typically give a very strong recommendation. Some folks have a different style. And so figuring out what kind of breach coaching style you would want to have in a crisis scenario, and each, like I said, organization has a different preference, is super important. So understanding who your vendor is going to be, in particular the breach coach, is there a connection there? And recognize, like I said, you're going to be in the foxhole with them for a long time. Like there are times we've been involved in files, didn't know the client beforehand, but became really, really close for all kinds of reasons with the CEO and the chair of the board, because you're working with them or the general counsel or the CISO, because you're on calls with them all the time. You're going through very difficult. And this is not a clear line either when you're dealing with a breach. There are a lot of bumps in the road. And as a result of it, when you face adversity, you need to know that the person you're walking through this adversity with is going to be by your side and you trust their judgment. So everybody should reach out to their breach coach or make a selection of a breach coach first and foremost. And if they have insurance, look at the list that they provide to you and go with meeting with them and assess and then make a choice. And don't just need one. Meet multiple breach coaches. Will give you a sense of whose style you prefer.
We've had the same experience. Unfortunately, during the investigation of an incident, we often establish very strong relationships with those customers. You really have to have really good bedside manner. I think of kind of the bedside nurse. A person is ill, and you want to make them feel good. And in the same scenario, I'm a private business owner myself, or a small business owner, so I can empathize with a lot of these organizations who, for some of them, this can be viewed as their worst day ever on the job, sort of thing. And so bedside manner and going in and saying, hey, you did this wrong, and it doesn't help the situation. And really it's navigating them through. And that's what builds those kind of strong relationships that you and I have both experienced. Now, very quickly, for those that do not qualify for cyber insurance or who don't have cyber insurance, what's your recommendation for them? Or is it similar? Because we get a lot of them who say, hey, I don't have cyber insurance, and how do I find a breach coach? Where do I go? Who should I set up a relationship with?
Look, insurance is great. I actually do believe it's a great risk transfer, risk mitigation strategy that you can employ. And so talk to your broker if you're interested. That's the advice I give to clients or folks who don't have the insurance piece. What the insurance typically does, it covers first party claims. So, the cost you would have for a breach coach or a forensic firm and so on. It would typically cover business interruption costs. It would cover cyber extortion, and any third-party claims you may get from, let's say, a business partner who has been impacted as a result of your incident. So a lot of the coverages I just mentioned, probably not available to you if you don't have insurance. But the first one, or the first-party coverage, having the team to be able to respond to the incident, that's something you can definitely prepare ahead of time. And you can have a lot of the similar players that you typically would have through insurance available to you that way as well. But the other piece, and this happened a lot about 2 years ago, the insurance market was, from what I've been told, qualified as hard, meaning it was a bit difficult to get insurance, or if you did get it, you didn't, the limits may have been lower than what you would have expected, or the premiums may have gone up, or in some industries, it would have been almost impossible. Yeah, exactly. So in those situations, the risk remained. And what a lot of clients did, and successfully, I think, is they invested on the pre-breach side. And they were really able to build that muscle memory so that at the end of the day, when they did respond, there's always that risk of third party and business interruption, extortion payment coverage that will not be available because you don't have the insurance. But you will be able to respond hopefully quickly and methodically that will mitigate any of the financial losses. So hopefully those other three portions or categories of coverage won't be necessarily as required or as pronounced in your breach.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think that brings us to time. So I want to thank you. I've always enjoyed working with you, Imran. And we'll put up for those that are interested your contact details should they want to reach out and engage your firm and engage you and your team. I know you have one of the most extensive teams in Canada that cover off this area. So thank you very much for your time today, and look forward to chatting.
Oh, likewise. And shout out to you and your team. I mean, you guys are doing great work in this space. And I know clients really enjoy working with you for all the support you provide to them pre and post incident. But really appreciate the opportunity to be here and have this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks again. Great.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Have a good day.